I was actually I was watching an interview that you did, and you were talking. I found it hilarious. I don't know if you came up with it or if somebody mentioned to you the four stages of being a session musician,
Yeah,
which were what? Who is Charlie Morgan? Get me Charlie Morgan. Get me somebody that sounds like Charlie Morgan, and then again, who is Charlie Morgan? Right?
yeah. You know who told me that one
No,
is Dave Mattox.
no.
From Fairport Convention.
Yeah.
And actually, Dave and I played on the same Elton album. We played on Ice on Fire.
Oh, that's a great album.
Yeah, we both did sessions on that. I think he did two or three songs, and I did two or three songs. Um, Elton was trying out rhythm sections during that time.
What has fascinated me a lot about you and session musicians like you, who are top level session musicians, you've done all these things. Um, I'm not there, but I'm thinking, you are right on the edge of fame, aren't you? Like it's right there, but you can go out of your hotel and get an ice cream before the gig, and nobody follows you and nobody bats an eye. How do you deal with that position? Is that comfortable for you?
Yeah, actually, the funny thing is that as time went on with the Elton band, more and more of the Elton fans got wind of us and the way we looked. And so it got less easy to simply go out for a coffee from the hotel. But, most of the fans were very respectful. I didn't have to go around with a security detail like Elton or Billy Joel or any of those people. It's, yeah, I mean, it's great being able to go to the high road, drive down to the high road and do some shopping without people bugging you. But there's a documentary about backup singers as well called, I think, is it called 50 Feet from Stardom?
Yeah, sure. And there's one about session players. It's called the hired gun, I think.
Hired Gun, yeah.
Yeah.
It's really is, people say, oh, you're a star. You're a star. No, I'm not a star. I work for stars. I have worked for stars, but I'm not a star. No, not in the slightest.
But you're comfortable with that position.
Yeah, I think so. We still get, we still get the chance if we're playing a major gig, we still get that chance to enjoy the crowd's response, the adulation, if you like, and the respect from the crowd for putting on a great show, even though we're backing up someone like Elton or but whoever we're behind. I've always been a hired hand.
So, because you've toured a lot, especially with Elton, you've done these massive gigs. I'm thinking Live Aid and Rio, and those two combined have like what, 300,000 people. I mean, I'm not even counting the people on television at home watching in front of the TVs watching Live Aid. And I was talking to Liberty DeVito a couple of years ago, and I was telling him that at any given point, at any given day, somebody must listen to your drumming, right? From Indonesia to Colombia. You might be having breakfast, sleeping. At some point, somebody's listening to Liberty DeVito, even though they might not be aware that they're listening to Liberty DeVito. And I was thinking about when Elton introduced you at Live Aid and he said Charlie Morgan. I'm thinking, for 3 seconds, your name reverberated throughout the world into every kitchen and living room, and that must be fantastic. Speaking of Live Aid, you said, because I was going to ask you if you thought it was going to be big, but then I remembered you said you took a camera with you because you kind of realized the closer it got that it's not a little thing, it's going to be a bit bigger. So what are your memories of that night apart from watching Freddie and the sound being horrible?
Yeah, I mean, I did. You're right. I bought one of those 35 mil self-focusing cameras that basically I could just pick it up and click anywhere. It wasn't anything very clever, and I took a lot of shots backstage. And I think I took a shot of me walking onto the stage with the crowd in front of us, 75,000 people, and I clicked that. And I've got a number of really nice shots of that kind of thing, and the after show party and the photo shoot with as many of the artists as they could gather. But yeah, I mean, Live Aid was as I said, I had no idea how big Live Aid was going to be. I mean, Elton, I was doing the second set of sessions for Elton. In fact, we were recording a track that Cliff Richard did a duet with Elton on it. I think it did end up on the Ice on Fire album called True Rivers, the Cold Rivers. Well, Slow Rivers. That's right, Slow Rivers, something Rivers. It was Slow Rivers, the duet. And so I'd done the first 3 days of sessions, and then Elton asked me back to do this one song. And during that time, I believe this is exactly what he said. He said, I'm doing this little charity show for Bob Geldof and Midge Ure, because if you remember, Midge Ure was actually involved quite heavily. I mean, Bob Geldof kind of took over because he's the alpha person, but I'm doing this little charity show for Bob Geldof and Midge Ure in July. Would you consider doing it? It means about 5 days of rehearsal, and we have to play a 45-minute set. And I said, yeah, sure. Where is it? He said, Wembley. And I thought he was talking about Wembley Arena, which holds like 12,000, you know.
Yeah, sure.
But then gradually the news got out, and I realized it was a lot bigger. And then it became this worldwide event where they were, you know, at JFK Stadium in the States, and there were all kinds of worldwide hookups. And so, but it really wasn't until I got to the show that I realized quite how enormous it was. I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I was thinking, do you still have those photos? Have you ever made them public?
I have, yeah, I do have some of those photos. Actually, a couple of years back when I was back in England, I did manage to scan some of the negatives because they're all on 35mm film, so I had to digitize them. So I got one of these negative scanners, and it scans everything and then puts it back into positive. And I do have a few of those. Not sure how many of them I can really publicize. I might put some up on the website at some point. My web girl Julie is very insistent that I need to put more stuff up there.
Well, maybe you should, because you made me curious. I'm thinking, wow, because it's like an inside thing, somebody who's actually there and took their own camera and did their amateur shoots. And speaking of touring, I'm thinking, because I'm curious, what was an average day like of touring for you, let's say in the 90s?
Okay, so yeah, in the 90s, after Elton had been through rehab, come out the other side, the band had a person coordinating our travel.
Right.
And we would get, well, we used to get a kind of booklet, which was a tour itinerary, which was supposedly exactly what was going to happen. But the thing about it is that stuff changes from day to day, even from week to week. So we used to call that the Great Book of Lies. And then we would get the Daily Liar was a sheet that was slipped underneath the door of our hotel room. And on that sheet, it would say, today we are going to, and it would show where it is, you have to be outside at, and give us the time, and put your bags outside before 1 o'clock in the morning. So basically you had to kind of get yourself ready and just have everything you were going to wear that day ready. And then you put your bags out so that someone could pick up the bags and take them with a luggage van to the airport. Because obviously, you know, traveling with that many people, there's a huge amount of baggage, and they would do a group check. So that's as if you're flying, but if you're in the bus, basically it would just say, okay, be at the bus at 8 a.m. We're driving to Philadelphia or something like that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so we had the Daily Liar and we had the Great Book of Lies, and that's what ruled our lives. And our band coordinator was the person that we dealt with all the time, and they were the ones that were making sure that we were in the right place at the right time.
And how did you stay physically and mentally fit during a tour? Do you think at the time, did you think the tours affected you in some way? physically or mentally? Did you have any rituals or you know, workouts,
Yeah,
anything?
yeah. I think, you know, in the early days, it was all sex, drugs, and rock and roll,
Yeah.
and you know, everybody was young enough to survive it. But when it got to the point where you know, we were touring in the 90s, and even now, especially, the requirement of the hotel was that it A, had a gymnasium, and B, preferably for me, had a pool so I could swim, because I could get up in the morning and swim as long as we're not leaving too early. I could do some swimming and relax the muscles. And then quite often, there were occasions when I would have to call the production office on the way and say, can you call in a massage therapist? I really need to, I've pulled a muscle and you really need to get relaxed before the show. And they would call in a massage therapist or a chiropractor. Funny thing is, one of the chiropractor that I see quite regularly here in Nashville, when I first met up with him on a recommendation, he said, you know, we've met before. And I said, really? He said, yeah, when you were coming through here with Elton and you were playing the Bridgestone Arena, which is the big gig in town, you had a problem with your lower back. And I was called up to come and help. So I saw you for 10 minutes or 20 minutes, but of course you were facing downwards anyway. So you probably didn't see much of me. He and I have become good friends since, but and he does a lot of muscle therapy and active release therapy. So he's really good for those of us who are getting older. And but yeah, I mean, you know, I would call in sometimes and say, look, I really to get through the gig tonight, I really would like to get some massage therapy. And they would find a local massage therapist and bring them in, and I would go into a spare room somewhere in the gig and get a massage before the show.
But when you were playing with these big stars, I suppose the band was always traveling separately.
Quite a lot of most of the time.
So you were like meeting them on stage, maybe only on stage most of the time for the first time?
Yeah, actually, well, Elton never did sound check. We used to do sound check because we like to feel safe about everything. Although our crew was so good that they could easily check everything for us.
I'll ask you about that. I suppose you skipped sound checks as well.
No, most of us. There were certainly Bob Birch on bass, Guy Babylon keyboard player, myself, John Jorgensen, sometimes Davey Johnston. We would go and sound check. We would just check our stuff and we'd maybe play one song. To give you an example, in 1995, we were on tour in Europe with Plant and Page. Right. So Robert Plant and Jimmy Page doing all the Led Zeppelin stuff. And we would swap top of the bill, you know, so one night Elton would go on, one night Plant and Page would go on. And somewhere through the middle of the tour, I think we all got quite bored with what songs we were sound checking, because they were always going to be an Elton song. So John Jorgensen got the idea that instead of that, we would do a Led Zeppelin song of the day. And he would phone us in our hotel rooms and say, okay, today we're going to do Immigrant Song. So we'd all go and find a listen to an Immigrant Song and double check that we knew exactly how it went. And that's the song that we would sound check that day. Or, you know, today we're going to do Kashmir. So we ended up basically sound checking a Led Zeppelin song to make sure we sounded good out front instead of an Elton song. You know, it was just to make things different, really, just to add a little bit of variety.
Throughout your session career, not just with Elton, what was the shortest amount of time you had to learn a gig? And I'm not talking about the Billy Joel gig, which wasn't supposed to happen and that was probably on the spot. But what was the gig that you learned in the shortest amount of time because you had to?
So this is live work, is it?
I guess.
Or studio work. I mean, studio work, you're normally presented with a song. You could be presented with a demo, or you could be presented with the person actually sitting in the room with a guitar or a piano and singing and playing. Right. And then you would discuss how you were going to do it. Then you'd go into the actual studio itself and start messing around with the song. And when the producer said, yeah, that's a great feel, do that, yeah, so keep doing that, And, you know, then you'd run a couple and you'd come in and have a listen. And they would say, yeah, I think we need to fix the middle eight or the second chorus. We need to go down in, you know, whatever. And then you'd go back in with those in your mind, those ideas in your mind, and you would do that. And eventually you get to a point where the producer or the artist would say, yeah, that's the take. We've done it, that we've done the right. That's the take that will go on the album. But with live work, well, I do a lot of these corporate shows now where I'm playing with 4 or 5 artists, all of whom have maybe 3 or 4 hits, sometimes more. And we literally have the day of the gig in which to rehearse the stuff. So we have to do what we call a lot of woodshedding. We have to do a lot of listening. And I actually chart out the songs. They normally give us the studio version of the song. Then they'll give us, if they have it, a live version of the song, a recent live version of the song. And we'll normally work out the format of the song from the recent live version of the song. But it's up to us to be able to turn up on the morning of sound check and run through all of those artists' songs one after the other to make sure that we've got the format right. And then that night is the show. So that's probably the least time that I've been given to prepare is these multi-artist shows. You know, I'm lucky for some of them we work with quite regularly and we know the songs. So all I have to do is to turn up and play.
Yeah, but most of the time, I'm thinking Elton, I'm thinking Kate Bush, I'm thinking even Eros Ramazzotti. You must have played, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not sure. I'm sure that Discogs.com doesn't lie because I try to do research, but there's so many names out there, and it's like there's a version of Se bastasse una canzone, right? But it's a re-recording, I think, and it's with Vinny Colaiuta. I think it's from the it's not the one that you did. There are 2 different recordings. I listened to them carefully. And,
really interesting, yeah.
And then I went back to the one from '91, and it was you. And what I'm trying to say is basically you've played on one of Romania's favorite songs, because that I'm not like half the country knows this song. Maybe it's the Italian language but that so many couples have danced on their wedding dance thing on like with your drumming. But where was I going with this? Oh, right. So what do you with Eros, with Elton, with Kate Bush? Did you when you wrote your parts, you wrote them yourself, or sometimes somebody said do that, do this, or maybe it was a mixture of both?
I'll give you an idea with Eros. That album I did in Milan, right, with a loaner Premiere kit. Actually, they just supplied me with a kit, and Eros was there. It was John Giblin on bass, who I worked with quite a bit on sessions, both in France and Italy. And we'd flown in. We did, I think, 6 or 7 tracks from the Ogni Senso album. Mm-hmm. I think that was the album, the name. I don't know. They've re-released stuff in different places as well. But Celso Valli was the producer. And he had charts, but they were not particularly, they were mostly chord charts. Mm-hmm. And he would sit down and he would play us the demo of the song. And a lot of the time he'd already put he was a keyboard player, so he put his keyboards down originally, you know, either on tape or as a sequence if we were doing it digitally. And then for Se bastasse una canzone, we went in and basically played it 2 or 3 times. And then Celso said, "Bon, this is the one," you know. And in fact, half the time we'd do a track and then he'd say, "Hey, Charlie, mangiare? Vuoi mangiare?" And we go off to have lunch, and then we come back and we do another track.
Are you doing tracks separately, or was the whole band recording together?
On that particular occasion, Celso had laid down his keyboards.
Okay.
And I knew this is how he worked because John Giblin and I had done a track for him in London for Claudio Baglioni. And that's how I met Celso. And then Celso called me or actually the record label manageress, who's an English woman, called me and said, we'd like you to come to Milan to do this album for this guy, Eros Ramazzotti, but don't say anything about Claudio when you're in Eros's presence, because they don't like each other very much. Apparently they were, competitors or whatever. Although Claudio is older, Claudio was kind of a guy who was in the decline of his career, and Eros was a guy whose career was, exploding and going upwards. But anyway, so she said, just keep quiet about having done that track for Claudio. Don't say anything about that. And we, that's how it was. The funny thing is that, Eros was there the whole time, and he was approving stuff along with Celso. And literally, I mean, we would do 2 tracks in the morning, and then Celso would take us to this amazing restaurant, and we'd have this incredible meal. And then we come back, and as we came back into the lobby of the studio was in an office block, and we come back in the lobby, and he'd say, okay, cafe, and we'd all have an espresso, and so that would wake us up, and then we'd go and do another track in the afternoon, and then in the evening he'd say, mangiare, andiamo a mangiare, and off we went, So John Giblin and I think we put on 5 pounds during that week.
Yeah.
But it was a lot of fun. It was very, very much a lot of fun. And I met Eros. Eros played the same open air festival near Hamburg that we did with Elton. And actually, Eros was topping the bill and Elton was on below him. I remember that. And I saw Eros was on the bill, and I asked if he was there already, if he had arrived, because we were being brought in by a bus, and we arrived about an hour before our show. And someone said, oh, yeah, he's here. He's here. Do you want to meet him? And I walked in, and there he was in his dressing room. And he had these 2 dogs. He told me originally, he had told me that after the sessions, he got these 2 Doberman. No, they were Doberman pinchers. Yeah, they were Doberman pinchers, and they were girl and boy. And he called one Charlie and one Morgan. And then I walked into the dressing room, and he said, "Ciao, Charlie. Ciao, Charlie." He said, very sad. He said, one of my dogs, she died. Morgan, she is dead, but Charlie's still alive. So yeah, he thought so much of those sessions that he named his 2 dogs Charlie and Morgan.
That's crazy, isn't it? That's crazy. You casually, because when you do this kind of work, you lose some gigs, or you're not available for the gigs, and you're maybe years later you're looking back, oh, I should have done that. And you casually mentioned Nick Mason asking you, I think it was the late 80s, one day if he wanted a percussionist, and you just like casually mentioned, well, I could have sort of been in Pink Floyd, or at least it could have been done session work with Pink Floyd, which, well, not a lot of people can say. But I'm thinking, is there anything you regret doing or not doing, or a gig that may have escaped you other than the Pink Floyd gig, or an artist you almost got to work with, but then you didn't?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think the Pink Floyd one is the one that would have been a complete split of the ways. And I was still under contract with Elton. And then Elton didn't pick me up. He didn't pick up the contract. So I lost the gig. But within a year and a half, they kicked out Jonathan Moffat, and I was back in the band. And Nikki, behave yourself. My dog's she's whining to go out, but she's been out. But anyway, yeah. So here's Nikki. Hang on, Nikki.
Oh, hi, Nikki.
Nikki, who's that? Look, that's Alex. Look.
Hi, Nikki.
Oh, look. I'm paying her too much attention now, and now she thinks she's gonna.
Yeah, that wasn't a good idea. Right.
I'm gonna let her out. 1 second.
Sure.
Go on. Okay, good go. That's it. She's going to go out and chase squirrels now.
But how do these things kind of end? You're under contract, so you either get paid a yearly or a monthly salary, or you get paid per gig, and then all of a sudden, what the record company says, well, your contract is not going to be renewed, and that's it.
Yeah, I mean, I phoned them when Nick Mason, Nick and I raced cars against each other and with each other over a number of years. So he phoned me and asked me if I would think about, consider it. And I said, yes, I'd love to, because he was, they had been off the road for a long time, and he didn't feel safe going out on his own to play drums. So he wanted someone to play drums and percussion and basically back him up, So I called Elton's office and said, are you renewing my contract? Because I was on a salary at that particular time, from 85 until 89, basically, right the way through 88. And
you guys don't have what they would call in English sort of residuals, right? You're paid for the sessions and you're paid for the gigs, but you're not paid royalties, right, for the song.
Well, we are and we aren't. We're not paid royalties for the songs, but we get something called PPL, which I believe is Phonographic Performance Limited.
Okay.
That is, if you're a session player, there's a pot of money that is paid by radio and TV stations to play the music, and a proportion of that goes to the musicians.
Right.
And I get a PPL check every 3 or 4 months.
All right.
4 times a year, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's one due at the end of September. And because I was a top session player in the UK for so many years, I am an A-list recipient. So, that I do get some money from that. And I co-wrote a couple of theme tunes for TV shows in the UK. So I also get performing rights royalties for that. But yeah, actually, there was one gig that I almost got while Elton was in rehab between 1990 and 92. And I was shortlisted, and that was with Sting. I would have loved to have done the Sting gig. I got a phone call from Sting's management saying, could you come and have a jam session with Sting? He knows all about you. He knows you played with Elton for X number of years. And I went down to Townhouse Studios and I met Dominic and Sting, and we had a jam session, played a few songs, and Sting said, well, that's great. I know all about you. I know your history. I know what you can do. I love what we've done. It feels great. I'm seeing one other person who is flying in from the States tomorrow. And Miles Copeland, the manager, will call you on Wednesday. And I said, fine, okay. So Wednesday came round, Miles phoned up and he said, well, I'm sorry to say that you didn't get the gig, but you were very much on the shortest list.
Yeah.
So I said, do you mind if I ask who got the gig? And he said, oh yeah, it's this American guy called Vinny Colaiuta. And I said, oh, I don't feel bad at all about that. Okay, well, fine, okay, no problem. And Vinny, I've been friends over the years anyway. We've done some gigs with Sting, and we've met and hung out, and he's a lovely guy and he's a ridiculously good player.
Right. When you were starting out, were you one of those people? Because every time I watch, people your age, people who were born in the 50s and the 60s or the 40s, everybody's got, like, I started playing because of the Beatles, right? Were you a Ringo guy when the whole thing was happening? Right. You were a Ringo guy. Because I can see you're not overplaying. You're not overplaying, and I was gonna ask about your thoughts on overplaying in pop music and all that, and yeah.
Well, first of all, I can't play like some of those really technical guys because I don't have the patience to just sit there and practice my rudiments all day long. Yeah. I only started. I did in my musical upbringing, I started learning piano at about the age of 9 or 10. I did, I think, up to grade 3 piano. Before that, I'd learned to play the recorder, the descant recorder. When I was 7 years old, I could sight read treble clef without a problem. because the Descant recorder was on treble clef.
Which is
so and my aunt was a violinist, my uncle was a cellist, my mother was an artist. So we had a very, very artistic upbringing. But a friend of mine whose father played cello on all the Beatles stuff. I mean, we grew up listening to the Beatles, and I loved all the Beatles music, but I don't think I really totally understood it the way Ringo played, the fact that Ringo played the song, until I actually started playing drums myself. And that happened, I was living in Switzerland at the time, and a friend of mine, one of my French-speaking friends, had a band room downstairs, and he had a drum kit in the room. And he used to bring me in to help translate the Beatles lyrics into a phonetic alphabet, so the French Swiss could pronounce the words properly.
Right.
And so I was there kind of as a translator, a phonetic translator. And Claude, who still runs a recording studio in Geneva, by the way, he's my age, and Claude Landale, he had this drum kit in his room. He was a guitarist, but he had a drum kit in his room for anyone to rehearse in. And I went and started playing the drums. I just started, I played a basic 4/4 beat. And he looked at me and said, "You've been practicing?" And I said, "No." He said, "How could you play that?" And I said, "It just seemed natural. I just did what Ringo does, And I watched what he did. And Claude said, "It took me 6 months to get to that stage. And I didn't think any more of it." And then we moved back to England. And this friend of mine, whose father played cello on all the Beatles stuff, he was a guitarist at the same school that I went to. And his uncle played the viola on the same stuff, He phoned me up and said, "Did I know anyone who played drums?" And I said, I don't know why, but I said, "I'll do it." And we got a bass drum, a snare drum, and a hi-hat from this secondhand store. And I fixed it up. And we started playing literally in his garage. And, until I was 18, I never had any idea about turning professional. It was all about, I was going to be a marine biologist. I was studying biology, physics, chemistry, all the sciences, and I was going to be a zoologist or a marine biologist. That was what I wanted to do. And then when I turned 18, I was playing in all the pubs in London with different bands. And I left school and just started playing professionally. So I'd only been playing from the age of 14 to the age of 18 at all. I really only started 4 years before I turned professional.
That's amazing.
So I was always very economical with the way I played. I always tried to play the song as opposed to showing off all over the place. The funny thing is that in recent years I've become much more technical or technically aware. I'm currently doing a progressive rock project for some friends of mine in England, a band called Castanark. And the first track they sent me was 7.5 minutes long and had 5 time signatures.
Right. I think too. Right.
But it's interesting. So as I've got older, I've become more aware of the technique. And also, for me, it's all about now trying to get the maximum effect out of the minimum output. It's what Nigel Olsson was always really good at.
Yeah. I was thinking about playing something you've done live, and you've done it in studios with movie soundtracks, I believe, as well, is playing with an orchestra. So the thing is, I play drums as well, and this is one of the things I've never done, which is playing with an orchestra. And because to me there are 2 options to it. It's like, first one is I'm just doing the thing. I'm playing. It's just not 5 people. It's 65 people. But whatever. I'm just playing drums. I'm playing the same way I would be playing with 5 people. It's just that there's more people behind me. So whatever. On the other hand, I'd be terrified of the idea of thinking, I'm kind of the backbone of this whole thing. So I'm supposed to you know. So how do you work with an orchestra? Maybe in a live setting, I suppose. Well, studio as well, maybe.
Yeah, well, the gigs we did with the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra in 1986 come to mind with Elton, and I likened that to piloting a super tanker. Because you know, if you try to stop a super tanker, it takes something like 3 miles to stop from the moment you hit the brakes, as it were. You hit the rear, whatever they do, reverse thrust, and then it takes several miles to stop. The whole thing about, well, particularly with a full symphony orchestra, which is 92 piece, yeah, you have to approach it in a different way. There is a certain delay. I mean, between one end of the orchestra to the other, there's a delay, physical time delay. And you've just got to kind of pull it back a bit, because otherwise you're going to be playing ahead of them all the time.
So you kind of have to drag it. You can play behind the beat a tiny bit.
Yeah, kind of. You've got to you've got to be aware of what's going on. I mean, in 1990, I toured Japan with Henry Mancini and the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra as well. And although they were quite young, or most of the orchestra members were pretty young and fairly hip, there's still a certain organic movement within the orchestra. I mean, if you go to an orchestral concert and you watch it from a particular point of view, you'd probably hear the slight differences between different sections, you know. A guy I worked with on some soundtracks, Trevor Jones. I did the G.I. Jane music, the soundtrack for G.I. Jane with Trevor Jones. And he had a great idea, because he had the London Symphony Orchestra in Studio 1 at Abbey Road. And then he had the rhythm section in Studio 2 at Abbey Road. And they were feeding both studios the same audio and the same click. But they were, what they did is they recorded the band on one tape machine, and they recorded the orchestra on another tape machine. And then at the end of the take, the sound engineer would shift the orchestra about a quarter second forwards from where they were.
Wow.
So that he would move it on against the rhythm section, and then they'd listen back to the take to check that everybody was kind of gelling. And yeah, so if you listen to the music if you listen to the soundtrack of G.I. Jane, you'll hear that coming into practice. I thought that was an interesting way to do it, because he said that orchestras just naturally lag behind the click, and session musicians are naturally right on the click. You know?
Right. I never thought of that. Another soundtrack you did, but this is not with an orchestra, but I think it's a great soundtrack, and it kind of heavily features your drumming, is Thelma Louise, which was a great soundtrack, and I think it really embraces the landscape and that kind of arid desert thing. And Hans Zimmer, I read on your website, had a lot of great things to say about you. And
yeah, Hans. Yeah, I mean, I go way back. I go at least 45 years back with Hans. I did several early movies for him, including Thelma and Louise. And I think Thelma and Louise was the big one that really got him his foot in the door of the American system.
Wasn't he playing with the Buggles on the Video Kill the
yeah.
He kind of
he's
like
the good-looking young chap playing the Moog synthesizer in the background.
So he's kind of like James Newton Howard, like he started doing pop, but then he kind of like, wait a minute, I can score movies.
And that might have come from, he did the augmentation of Paul Buckmaster's scores for Elton when we did the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra tour, and it was James Newton Howard conducting the orchestra.
Right. Yeah.
So he expanded the string sessions to a full orchestra, and then conducted them. And I think soon after that, he started doing a lot of movie work. And so between Hans and James, I think they're probably the two of the most successful movie soundtrack composers around.
When did you start working with Hans? Because you said 45 years. What was the first thing you worked on? Because it wasn't Thelma and Louise, right? That's from
No, but I did a few other non-movie sessions, and then I did a session for a movie called The Fruit Machine, starring Robbie Coltrane.
Yeah, I don't know that one.
It was a low budget movie.
Okay.
And it was a very interesting movie. He played a nightclub owner, a gay nightclub owner. It was kind of a weird movie, but that was the first movie that I did with Hans. And then later on, he called me in to do this other movie, Thelma and Louise. We did the last cue first. So I knew what happened at the end.
All right. When they
before I even saw the movie.
Yeah. You're talking about the big 7-minute thing, you know, that instrumental part where they go off the cliff, right? That.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. We did that first.
That was a big spoiler, wasn't it? Yeah.
It was. He said to me in his German, he said, "Charlie, we are going to do the last scene first. I apologize because now you know what happens in the movie." But he kind of apologized. I'm not sure he was terribly apologetic about it. I think he just I think it was part of his weird sense of humor as well, you know. But yeah. Anyway, so yeah, we did the last cue first, probably because it was one of the more complicated ones.
Do you have any because you did the James Bond things, and is there any soundtrack or the recording process of a soundtrack that you know you remember as being more interesting than the others? You're like, oh, I really enjoyed doing that one, recording that movie soundtrack for whatever reason.
Well, I really enjoyed Tomorrow Never Dies. That was the first one that Dave Arnold did. And he actually phoned me and said, look, I've got the Bond gig. He'd just come off the success of Stargate. And then I think he did Independence Day before he got the Bond gig. But he'd done several movies with Dean Devlin, screenwriter. And so he got some fame from that. And then he was handed the Bond theme thing because various people were retiring and he was the next person in line. And I think it was a logical choice. And then we did Tomorrow Never Dies, but he was quite nervous about doing it with a 77-piece orchestra. So he wanted somebody he knew. And he and I met on David Knopfler's album, which we recorded at Pete Townshend's studio.
Okay.
And we met then. And then he phoned me up and said, hey, look, I need you to do this. Would you do it? And I said, absolutely. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I think I was recording an album with Elton at the time. When we did the very first cue. You know how the Bond movies have that kind of 5 to 8 minute beginning, and then they have the actual theme, and then they continue with the movie. And it's always something that's kind of not connected.
Yeah.
Tomorrow Never Dies had this, these guys coming in he was checking out these arms dealers somewhere in the middle of Afghanistan, and and then they attack the whole thing, and so we had to do that cue, and it was done. We did that in we did 2 takes with the orchestra. Second take was the one where they chose. We just did 2 takes. And again, if you listen to it,
no overdubs, right? Everybody was playing.
No overdubs. Everybody in there at once. That's it. No chance for, for fixes. It's probably lucky that I'm an adrenaline junkie because, I've survived on that adrenaline for 50 years. This is my next week will be 50 years I've been playing drums professional.
Wow. Next week, so that's September 1973.
That's September 73.
Wow.
I hit the road. I left school and hit the road, decided I was going to be a professional musician. So Then I joined a band and we played the US Air Force bases in Germany over Christmas and New Year of 73 into 74. So yeah, that was somewhere around mid-September. I'm calling it September the 15th. So basically it's 3 days from now. It'll be my official anniversary, 50th anniversary.
Yeah. So did you ever think it was gonna last that long? Did you have a vision, or were you like, I'm going with the flow, whatever happens? I'm just.
That was it. You
Yeah.
know, I joined various different bands. I got signed up to a record label with one band that fell to pieces. And during the first 4 or 5 years, I realized that every band I was in was only ever as good as the person who drank the most, took the most drugs, or turned up the latest. And it was normally the same person. And I started doing songwriting demo sessions in the mid 70s, 74, 75. And I graduated to doing master sessions later on in the late 70s. And by the time I met Elton, I was one of the top session players in England.
But you were one of the top session players in England when the drum machines were starting to pick up some steam, right? Because you've got like some Queen albums where Roger Taylor is not even there half the tracks. I'm thinking maybe A Kind of Magic.
Or I Want to Break Free, or
yeah, you know. So I'm like, did you ever see that as a threat to not just to you but the entire drumming community? Did you ever think, well, this is everybody, more and more people are going to use these drum machines. What am I going to do?
Well, I started doing a lot of MIDI sequencing, and I learned a lot about MIDI in the early 80s. I became Simmons Drums research drummer, helped Dave Simmons with developing the drums and the sequencers.
You know, the first kick that I had, the first drum kit that I had was a Simmons electronic drum kit. It was one of those, like it has 6 edges, like kind of that thing.
Yeah, the hexagonal pads.
Exactly, from the 80s, and it was like so weird for like it didn't really feel like an actual drum at all. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Well, and I helped implement the SDS-7 and the SDS-9, which had rubber cushioned pads that felt much better.
Right.
And yeah, so I helped them develop, and I learned I learned everything about MIDI from Simmons and the people that I was working with. But it got to the point where so many tracks came out that were machine, and some people started booking me to play live drums over sequenced recordings to make it feel more live. And I got really good at playing to clicks and playing along to sequences to make it feel human.
Thinking Kate Bush, is that the thing you did with Kate Bush?
Some of the time with Kate Bush, yes. I worked a lot with her.
Drums kind of sound, they sound natural, but then they don't. You know, it's like an in-between kind of sound, right?
But most of the time, that's either Stuart Elliott or me replacing the kind of idea that she had on the Fairlight, and we'd go in and play it.
Right.
And both Stuart and I got very, very good at playing to sequences and to clicks.
What do you think was like the biggest advantage that you had, your biggest characteristic that got you doing these gigs? What would you say? Well, you know, apart from, you know, I don't know, playing drums really well, I guess.
I think a lot of it was down to work ethic. You know, I was willing to turn up early, on time, and I had, you know, all the right equipment. I did have this knack for being able to play along with clicks and play along with sequences, and no heroics, not too much showing off. Not, you know, I realized that being a session musician was more about blending with the rest of the band than it was about showing off my abilities. And I think that's underplaying wherever possible. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. It makes a lot of sense. It, you know, all the great session musicians that I heard or I got the chance to interview, they kind of all say the same thing, you know, like you say, it's like it's not a place for you to show off, you know, not necessarily. Depending on the genre, I suppose, but if we're talking
True, yeah. I mean, if you're in Rush, you know,
yeah,
you're basically, you know, it's progressive rock. It's like this album I'm doing now. I'm trying to make myself overplay more than I would normally do so, because and again, see, I will send them 3 or 4 takes, and I'll tell them, okay, take 1 is the safest one. Take 2, I'm pushing a little bit in places, I'm branching out and doing some more stuff. And take 3, I've done as many fills and I've really overplayed as much as possible. So you can take like a combination of the 3. And normally, you know, the first thing I will present a client with when I'm recording here, you know, in my studio. I mean, this is, you know, so here we are. This is basically we're in the control room here. And that's the track up there. Doing this, I've realized that because it's long distance, they can give me an idea about what they want me to play, and sometimes they'll send me a drum pattern that, you know, they say, well, either say ignore the drum pattern, or yes, this is kind of what we want. So I will do 1 take that is as close to what they had in mind, and then after that I'll say, well, maybe this is more what you had in mind, and I'll give them something. I'll give them another choice, and then it's up to them which one to choose.
right.
That's how I do the long distance sessions.
Can you tell me a bit about one of my favorite albums that you played on? Was Made in England. I think that's a great album, and it has some great drumming on it, especially on Made in England, and I think Believe and some others. I like, from the big picture, I like If the River Can Bend. That has some great drumming on it as well. But what are your memories of the Made in England sessions?
That was interesting, because we tried to be as organic as possible, wherever possible. Although some of the time Elton was laying his piano and vocal part down to, I mean, I was brought in a week beforehand to, and I was paid for a week's work to create some interesting percussion drum patterns. And I just created a whole bunch of weird patterns that might, you know, and I could basically throw them at Elton from, you know, I had all my stuff set up next to the kit at Air Studios, all my electronics with the sampler and the drum machine and the sequencer. And I would just hit the button and say, well, what do you think about this? And Elton would go, no, not that one. And I'd say, what about this one? I said, I'm not sure about that. I mean, for example, Believe.
Yeah, you said
Believe
was a tabla thing, right?
It was a tabla part.
Yeah.
That I'd found. I basically created this tabla part that went, and I played that to Elton. He went, yes, keep that one going. Go, run that one now. And he did a demo with that drum machine part. So when we did Believe, Bob Birch and Elton and I actually played that together, but we played it to the drum, to the tabla. And I think in the mix, Greg Penny brought in the tabla part in the second verse. You can hear it in the background, just in the background, just behind the drums. And we actually used to use that on stage. We had it on a loop. And because Elton had a tendency to slightly push the beat, we had 2 separate samples. One of them was several beats a minute faster than the other. And my drum tech would be listening to see. And if we started to push against the existing one, it was only a 2-bar loop. So I would I'd hit the pad every 2 bars, and then we'd be playing.
Okay, yeah.
And so I'd do, you know, dun, 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 pad. Dun, dun,
right. So you never.
And then if we sped up, if we started pushing, and the loop was lagging, my drum tech behind me would just click it onto the next to trigger the next loop that was just slightly faster for the end of the song. And he pretty well knew when Elton was going to start speeding up. It was normally in the instrumental section that Davy's playing the guitar solo and Elton get excited and he would start pushing on the beat, and I would go with Elton and I'd find it lagging behind, and I'd look over at him and he'd go, it's done, I've already switched it, and the next time I hit it, it would be a slightly different tempo.
That is crazy.
So that's the only way we could play with any kind of sequencing with Elton, because Elton always liked to keep it organic. He liked to be able to stop something at a minute's notice, seconds notice. So we very rarely had anything that was sequenced at all.
I never played with tracks. Never played with tracks.
No, we couldn't, because Elton was too organic.
Right.
You know, he might want to extend a solo or shorten something or go towards the end quicker or give somebody an extended instrumental, you know, or stop the whole thing and have the band, you know, have the audience clap along to the band and then restart. So it was never possible to really work with sequences with Elton, which is great, you know, because it was all organic.
He did have a thing, I think, in Rio where, if I remember correctly, like during the gig, he couldn't breathe and all that, you know, had a thing of a, yeah. I'm thinking about that. I think it was in a documentary, I think Tantrums and Tiaras, I think that's the name of it. What was the hardest gig you've ever done? Not as in the songs were hard to learn, but I don't think I'll be able to do this gig. Like, did you ever throw up in a bucket that was behind you, or, you know, because I know
we played a stadium in Lisbon, in Portugal, and for some reason we went out for dinner the night before, and I must have eaten something that disagreed with me, because the next morning I had horrible stomach problems, had terrible diarrhea, and I called in to the production office at the gig from my hotel, and I spoke to my drum tech. I said, Pete, first of all, you're going to have to find me an escape route, because I have got the shits, and find me the nearest bathroom from the back of the drum kit.
All right, so you were not at the hotel, you were doing the gig.
Well, I was going to sound check, but I called him from the hotel and said, look,
okay,
this is the situation. I better warn you, you know, I will need to be able to run to the toilet and come back in between songs or when Elton's doing his solo thing at any point. Anyway, so he started scoping out toilets. But the funny thing is that everybody in the crew got to hear about this. So I remember I turned up at the gig. By this time, I was completely, I emptied myself completely. So I don't think there was a worry at that point. But I arrived at the gig, and I arrived at the back of the drum riser, and the crew had built a toilet paper pyramid behind my drum kit that was about 6 foot high. And they'd also created 2 escape routes made out of gaffer tape, white gaffer tape, that showed me the way to the toilet, and they graffitied all over it, like ooh, all the way down to the toilet, the nearest toilet. So, you know, of course, I was the laughing stock that day. I was the brunt of their humor. But you know, every time I look round that show, there's this massive pile of. I mean, they must have taken every single toilet roll or gone out and bought a whole bunch of toilet rolls, and then just piled them up as a pyramid. I think I remember I kicked it over at the end of the show, but it was literally behind me, right behind me on the drum riser. So that was a fairly difficult show. Other than that, I've played a couple of shows with big hangovers because we had a big party the night before. But really, that was the hardest. I played some shows in 2001. We played South America with multiple artists. We had, let's see if I can remember who was on this. Glenn Hughes from Deep Purple, Jolyn Turner from Rainbow and Deep Purple, Jimmy Jameson from Survivor, Alex Lidgetwood from Santana. So this is one of these multi-artist shows, and we were touring South America, and we played La Paz, Bolivia, which is at 10,000 feet.
Right.
And that night's show was a real struggle for everybody, because we flew in from Colombia, from Bogota, and did the show, and then the next day we flew out to Argentina. So we were only at 10,000 feet for about 36 hours, and they were feeding us coca tea, you know, which has the coca leaves in it to increase the oxygen, and they were feeding us aspirin. But still, I remember I had a oxygen bottle next to me, and I think we're playing Deep Purple and Rainbow stuff, you know. You know, it's pretty high energy.
But
and
yeah, sure. Go ahead. Sorry.
So, you know, I had to, there were several times when I just had to go to the oxygen and do that, because I had a massive headache the whole time I was there.
You know what I'm curious about, when we do these big gigs, do you guys, the people in the band, I mean, okay, if the artist cannot make it, then the gig is canceled. They got the flu or virus or whatever. Do you guys had any replacements?
No, not right there.
No. So like worst case scenario, maybe the tech guys would have been able to know.
Yeah, possibly. Although my drum tech is not really a drummer; he's a guitarist and a bass player.
Okay,
he's actually teching for Manu Katché on Peter Gabriel's tour right now.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
So basically, you had to take care of yourselves the same way the whatever artist you were playing it had to take care of themselves, because I mean, at that level, canceling a gig is pretty. You don't want that to happen, you know?
Yeah, there'd have to be a really good reason to cancel the gig, and you don't want that reason to be you. Yeah. Which is why, you know, as we went on, we got more and more health conscious, and we got more and more, you know, we wouldn't drink before a show. I never drank before a show. Yeah, I learned from the hard experience that if I consumed any alcohol before a show, I thought that I was playing really well, but I'd come off stage and everyone would say, "What the fuck happened to you?" And I thought, okay, all right, I'm done with this. You know, this was early on. This was in the 70s. So I never drank before a show. I would have maybe a drink afterwards to relax, but never drank before a show.
Did you ever think of, well, I'm pretty sure I'm not the only person asking this, but did you ever think of writing a book with all the stories?
Yeah, well, I am kind of writing. Yeah, I had a discussion with my web girl, Julie. She said, you know, are you going to start writing a memoir? And I said, yeah. But, you know, I don't want it to be yet another. And then I played with ... you know, because it's so boring, you know. Oh, yeah, I played with him, and then I played with him, and then it was great, and then I played with him, and it was not so great. And then, you know, it's just a list. Right. And we were talking a little bit more. We were chatting, and I just said something about I was very grateful to people in the early days, that people that stuck their necks out and took a risk with me and had enough confidence in my ability to push me and give my number to other people. And Julie said, gratitude. That's your line, gratitude. And I said, yeah, okay, that's the title of the book. So I'm now writing a bunch of chapters. At the moment, they're not in chronological order, and I'm in the process of putting them up on the website as and when I remember. But I'm taught each chapter is about a person who had a positive effect on my career.
Yeah.
A lot of them are people early on, but you know, various people. Hang on, get rid of that one. I know who it is. It's a keyboard player friend of mine who I've known for 40 years. Happens to live in Nashville. But yeah, so yeah, the basically it's all based on gratitude towards the people who helped to push me, helped to get me more work, you know, the people through the network, really.
You know who really had a positive impact on my career? well, my side journalistic career, it was actually you, because in 2014, I don't know if you remember, or if you scrolled through our conversation, if you scroll a bit, in 2014, I sent you a message and I said, can I interview you? Because I had like a blog thing. And I sent you a list of questions and you said yes, and that happened. But the idea was, I never thought you'd say yes, right? I said, you know, Charlie Morgan did this, he did that. He's not gonna, like, who am I? He's not gonna say yes. And you were like, immediately after I sent the message, you were like, yeah, sure, send me the questions. And I sent you the questions and you reply like huge chunks of text, like you weren't, like you were, you know, and I was like, that kind of sparked a lifelong interest in music journalism for me, which I put on hold for years when I played. But then during the pandemic, I was like, well, you know, I remember I did that with Charlie 6 years ago. And I'm like, well, he said yes. And that was a great lesson for me. I was like, that was a great lesson in humility, I guess. It's like, you know, he could have said no, but he said yes. It's not a famous blog. I'm not a famous person. He's not gaining anything for this. And I'm like, that's great. I'm going to start asking other people. And then I got Liberty and Pete Best and Caleb Quay and Ian Pace. And it all started with the fact that you'd said yes to me 10 years ago. And I'm like, well, you can ask. You can ask a question and maybe they say yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so, it doesn't take anything to ask. I mean, if you get a no, fair enough. But, you know, it's and I think that more and more people in the industry are realizing that it's all about the fans and it's all about the social networking.
Yeah.
I think the days of the reclusive rock star have kind of come to an end, and that's mostly down to social networking. I think that, but you see, I realized this very early on. I mean, when I was touring with Elton in the mid to late 90s, I had a record label. I co-owned a recording studio and had a record label with a friend of mine. And we actually had a server. We had a server in our office with a high-speed internet connection to that server. And I had a website on that. I was the only person in the entire Elton John band, including Elton John, who had a website. And the Elton fans realized this very quickly, and they started connecting with me through my email. And so I was getting email questions, and I met a lot of them, you know, online, and I met some of them at gigs. And I started communicating with a number of them. And, you know, so I think I was very, very quick to realize the beauty of the social network. And, you know, Elton didn't have a website. None of the rest of the band had a website. So I was the only method of contact that the Elton fans had at the time in like 96, 97, 98. And of course, now they've got eltonjohn.com, and they've got, you know, all kinds of spin-off Elton fan pages, and everybody's doing Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or whatever we're supposed to call it now, X.
Yeah.
You know, all of the social networking it's massively important.
Well, Charlie, thank you so much. Thank you for doing this interview. It was great to meet you. And I hope you have a lot of fun writing your book. If you ever put it out, I'll be happy to read it.
I think I'll be putting it out in installments on the website blog, on the manicdrums.com website. I promised my web girl I would do more this autumn.
Cool.
And yeah, so yeah, I'm going to try to do like a chapter a week and put it up there. I've actually also got another blog that's connected to that's about electric vehicles, because I've become something of an EV nut since lockdown, actually. I got my first electric vehicle during lockdown, and then I've had 2 others since. So I write an electric vehicle blog that's connected to my website that's called From Petrolhead, because I raced cars in the you know 80s and 90s. My brother and I were huge petrol heads, and I said from petrolhead to evangelist, and the EV is in capitals. And so that's a side blog that I put on. And I'm trying to dispel all these myths that have been probably propagated by the oil industry about, you know, why one shouldn't be using electric vehicles and that kind of thing.
Right. I think I saw that section on your website when I was doing
You probably did. It's just it's a subheading.
Yeah.
But I promised her that I would write more on that, and I would also write more about the music business.
Yeah. Well, I wish you good luck with that, and with the book, and with whatever projects you have right now. And thank you again. And I'm sure the people who will listen to this will be very happy to hear you talk and hear your stories, and drummers as well, and musicians as well, because they'll probably be listening too. So thanks a lot.
You're very welcome. And anytime you need to speak to me again, please just don't hesitate.
Great. Thank you. And
right,
say
Alex.
To, what was her name? I forgot her name.
To Nikki?
Nikki, yeah, right. Bye, Nikki. It was great to meet you.
Nikki. I think she heard you.
Right, you can go out now and catch some squirrels or whatever she's.
You know what she catches? She catches moles.
Oh, or moles. Yeah, whatever.
She digs down and catches moles. So she's my mole catcher.
Well, everybody needs a mole catcher, right?
Right. Yes, especially when your backyard is being ravaged by them.
Thank you so much. Have a great
You're welcome.
day. Thank you. I'll keep you updated with like when this will be broadcast, and if you want to check it out or whatever. Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely.